Well, we are continuing our trip back in time because if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked with Heidi Hollis, who was one of the very earliest guests of Spooky South Coast. Well, tonight we're going to go even further back in time. We're going to go all the way back. We're going to have the second guest that we ever had on Spooky South Coast, or a guest from our second show. I don't remember the exact order because we had two guests that night. I don't remember if he was first or second. I think he was second. But we're going to go with, the second guest of all time because we have Paul Eno joining us tonight on the show. We're going to be talking about all kinds of paranormal topics and find out what Paul's been up to in the 11 years since we've talked to him. And we'll also take your calls, your thoughts in the chat room, your questions, and of course, whatever else comes up along the way. Episode 494 of Spooky South Coast starts right now. Here, and when I said we were going old school tonight, I wasn't kidding because it is just myself and the silent assassin Matt Costa. It's like 2006 all over again, which the only difference is now I'm supposed to know what buttons to press and I just am not pressing them correctly. So try that one. See if that works.
Does that work?
Hey, it sounds like it's working. Remember back then though when you were sitting over here and you had to do all the work?
I do.
Evan was yelling at you about there being dirt in the chamber.
Right. The buttons haven't really changed too much.
Remember when...
There's more of them, I guess.
Remember when I used to do the show standing up over there?
Yeah.
I was going through YouTube and looking at some of the old videos, and I was like, oh, yeah, I remember when I used to stand up. Now I couldn't stand up for the Week in Weird segment, let alone for the whole show.
10 years ago, we had a lot more energy.
We did.
Yeah.
And a lot less stomach in my case. So we are here to talk about the paranormal, as we do each and every Saturday night, as we have for the last 11 years. And as I mentioned, joining us in just a bit will be Paul Eno. We're going to be talking about some of the, kind of everything in the paranormal. Although when we had Paul on before, if you remember, Matt Costa, I don't know if you recall all the way back 11 years ago, but when we had Paul on the first time, the discussion really got going. We talked about a variety of different topics, but we really kind of zeroed in on talking about quantum theory, which was the first time that I ever really had discussed it with anybody when it came to ghost theory, is the idea of there being multiple universes rubbing up against each other and that could be what we're experiencing when we're encountering a ghost. And even in those early beginning stages of the show, that really changed my mind on a lot of things. And that really got me thinking already right out of the box in my early stages as a paranormal research person, thinking to myself, well, we don't have to assume that they're dead people because it could be a variety of different things. There's a variety of different possibilities. And so I've never kind of lost that. So we have Paul Eno to thank for that. And episode 2 of Spooky South Coast, I still can't talk all these years, to thank for that as well. And I'm just thinking back in my head when it was all happening, saying to myself, like, that was a great conversation, but if we keep doing shows like that, we'll never last. If we keep talking about all these weird alternative theories to ghosts, we'll never stick around past a couple of months. What was our original goal? We wanted to just make 6 months. Was that the idea?
I'm trying to remember what Evan told us the definition of success was, or the time period.
I think it was like 6 months.
I thought it was even shorter. I thought it was only like 3 months.
Really? That sounds right. Like that if we could make it that far, we should think that we were okay.
The secret to success is not letting people know that you're on the air at the station.
Right.
Or
yes.
just going not
letting them
not
forget.
exactly not letting them know, but just going under the radar of pretty much everyone here at WBSM.
Here's how the
and
original,
then just be like, oh, you can't get rid of us now. We've been on for 6 months.
You gave us a key. Yeah. It's too late now. But if you remember, that's kind of how the timeline went for us in the early days. You know, it was in September that we got the call and toward the end of September of 2005. Do you want to do a show? What do you want to do the show on? The paranormal? Really? What? Ghosts and stuff? Yeah, sure. So it was like the end of September that conversation happened. And then we took a couple of months to kind of plot out what it was we were going to do and kind of, get audio stuff ready and, take those promotional photos out by my shed that I still haven't painted 11 years later. And all these different, avenues of what we wanted to do, get them all those ducks lined up in a row. And then I think it went from September to, okay, when do you guys want to start? Okay, all right, let us know and we'll talk about it that week. And then they forgot about us all the way until that time we showed up and the door was locked.
Right.
Which was like 2011. So then it's like, oh, you guys are still on? Okay, well, we'll give you a key. And like now it's, I think they've forgotten again.
Did we have a big guest or something? Is that what happened?
Do you remember that night? That was the night. I was just talking about this with Brian the other day. We were going to have on Sandman Kelly, who was planning this big excursion out to where the Titanic was.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And it took a lot of finagling to be able to line him up to be the guest on the anniversary of the Titanic sinking. And we were going to talk about it, which was being planned for a year out. They never ended up doing the investigation, but it was going to be, the following year after that. And we ended up and we promoted the show for like 2 weeks because we had missed the week before because of baseball. So we were promoting like, we're going to be on, we're going to talk about this. And then we showed up and nobody was here and the door was locked. And we called everybody that we knew that worked here and nobody was home on a Saturday night.
And now we have fobs.
Now we're fancy.
Yep.
So now they can't stop us. So the good part is...
Who would want to?
Want to stop us?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they can't stop us at this point. We'll just find ways around it.
There's no stopping what can't be stopped.
We're 600. We're 6 episodes away from 500. We're getting there, no matter what.
Right.
It's going to happen, and then whatever goes after that, we'll be like, whatever. What happens when we hit 500? Do we start gunning for 600? Do we start gunning for 1,000, or do we say, 500 episodes? It's all gravy from this point.
I think there needs to be something that dramatic. Either, I don't know, maybe one of us should take up a drug habit. Just, so we have that behind the podcast.
Right. We're gonna need the special.
Right.
That goes without saying. We actually have a guest planned for the 500th episode whenever it comes along, because we have some scheduling changes coming up with events. But when this 500th episode does happen, we're basically looking at it as like a birthday party to ourselves because we didn't really throw ourselves a birthday party this year. So we're going to have a special guest on who we just had on recently, but whatever. It's our birthday. It's our special day. We can do whatever we want. But I'm going to leave it at that. Pseudo name in the chat room. Go for 666 episodes. When we get to 666, we're going to have to book a really weird guest for that night. We're going to have to get like whoever's in charge of the Church of Satan now. Or Linda Blair. She was nice when we got to meet her at TerraCon. Maybe she'll come on.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Sorry, I'm just going to keep coughing throughout the whole show. So I just want to let everybody know, just want to remind everybody that next weekend we will not have a live show. I'm going to try and see if we can put something together taped, so at least we'll have a podcast and something airing on WBSM. But we will not be here in the Spooky Studio live because we'll be at Salem Con, which is taking place at the Hawthorne Hotel in Salem. The VIP package, the Ghost Hunt package, all that stuff sold out. However, you still can get tickets for the day of event. So on Saturday the 22nd, you can come down to the Hawthorne Hotel. You can see all the vendors that'll be there. You can talk to all the paranormal celebrities that'll be there. And you can attend the lectures that'll be taking place as well. So all of that is available. If you still want to try and get tickets to that, just go to mghparanormal.com. That's Masked Ghost Hunters Paranormal. mghparanormal.com. And you can get tickets to the actual event itself, to the actual Saturday day of convention. There are also tickets still available for in May 12th to the 14th, the Provincetown Paracon, which will be taking place at, we're going to be taking over all of Provincetown that weekend. So if you have always wanted to go there, or maybe it's been a while since you've been there, come on out and take part in that. The Kindred Spirits VIP party will be happening Friday night from 8 to 11. And then on Saturday, there will be the actual conference day itself with lectures and all that kind of stuff going on, a ghost hunt Saturday night. And then on Sunday, we're all going to try and get together for a little bit of breakfast and all that stuff. I might have to jet out because I might have to be involved in filming that day. But Amy Bruni, Adam Berry, they'll be there. Stephanie Burke, John Brightman, Greg and Dana Newkirk. We're all taking over Provincetown for the weekend. Sam Baltrusis, he will be our fearless leader that weekend, and we will own that town. So you can still get tickets to that as well. Just go to provincetownparacon.com. And if anybody out there is looking for a unique sponsorship opportunity to directly advertise to the paranormal community, Sam still has a couple of sponsorships open. So maybe you make paranormal gear. Maybe you have a paranormal group. You can get involved with that. And Sam is actually going to be, we're giving away tickets to the Paracon, to the Saturday Paracon, right here on Spooky South Coast and on our social media, SpookySouthCoast.com, on our Twitter feed, at SpookySC, on our Facebook page, all of that. So join us across social media. Just go to SpookySouthCoast.com. You can find all that. And a little bit later on this week, we're going to start giving away tickets. I think we're going to do it. We'll give away a pair on the show, and then we'll give away a pair during the week, each week leading up to the Paracon. So you have a chance to win, but I also recommend that you get those tickets fast so that you don't miss out. You can probably still hear me cough when I do that, huh? I cough pretty loud. So, Matt Costa, when was the last time you were in Provincetown?
I went there a couple of years ago.
I was there 2 years ago to do a lecture at the library. And I just drove right to the library, and then I drove right home again. So I'm really interested to have some time to spend there and see how things have changed since the last time I've been. But all I can remember is the last time I went getting ice cream and going to the candy store.
Yeah.
Which I still plan on doing.
Are you going to do the tower?
I'm thinking about it. I've never done it. Is there an elevator or just stairs?
Just stairs. Yep.
Pilgrims weren't big on elevators?
No.
I guess I'll have to do it.
It's quite a hike.
I guess I'll have to do it. I'll be all right. If I can climb those pyramids in Belize,
yeah.
I'm sure I can climb that thing.
No problem. Well, it depends on if you hit the candy store before or after.
Right. Ice cream and candy comes after. All right. Well, those events are coming up, so please join us for both of those events. Hope to see you all next weekend for sure. And I'll be presenting. By the way, I announced last week on the show, and I mentioned today on social media, I'll be presenting a new lecture that I've never done before called From Fox Sisters to Ghost Brothers. How modern-day paranormal investigation is just modern-day spiritualism. So I'm sure I'll anger some people and make some other people think. That's what I try to do at Salem Con. And then when I go to the Ocean State Paracon in July in Harrisville, Rhode Island, then I'm just trying to present something that will keep people interested while they're coming in to cool off in the air conditioning. That's my goal then.
Right, just to be slightly entertaining while people cool off.
Right. People. I always have fun because it's always a different audience. You know, when you go to different places and give presentations. And our guest Paul Eno, who we'll bring on in just a second, he will vouch for that too, because he goes around and he gives a lot of different presentations, and himself and his son Ben, they go around talking about different topics, and I'm sure that they can tell you the same thing, that depending on who your audience is, really depends on where the conversation can go. We have ideas of what we want to talk about, but then when you see the way the audience is reacting, it kind of changes your mind a little bit, and it kind of changes the direction of where you can go. And I've been in some libraries where I start doing a Paranormal 101 presentation because that's what the library wants, but then I'm looking around and I'm seeing that all these people that are out there, they're all kind of nodding their head and rolling their eyes, and they're people that I've seen at other things. I'm like, well, you guys know all this, so let's take it a little bit deeper. And that's one of the advantages of kind of knowing the audience, is that you can make those changes on the fly. So that's why I'm trying to come out of the gate at Salem Con with something that'll make people think, because these are all paranormal people. They're all people that know what they're doing, and they're all people that certainly have a history of already scratching their heads at some of the things that I've been saying. So I think we have Paul Eno joining us now. Paul, you with us?
Yes, as far as I know.
Oh, you are. Sounds great. And Paul, I was just saying, that when yourself and Ben, you guys are out on the lecture circuit. You are out talking to different audiences all the time. Sometimes when you're talking to people, you can tell that you can kind of push the boundaries of the way you need to explain things and really push the boundaries of what you can discuss. And I'm going to say that tonight, 11 years after we had you on the show for the first time, I think that we can push the boundaries a little bit more because we are, I don't want to say much more knowledgeable, but we're far less unknowledgeable than we were the last time that we talked to you.
Well, that may be. I don't know.
Well, I was just saying.
That's a long time. Time flies when you're having fun, Tim.
Oh, absolutely. And I was saying at the beginning of the show that, the first time that we had you on was the first time that we'd really learned about quantum theory when it comes to the paranormal. And I remember saying to my co-host, Matt Costa, that if we keep talking about deep topics like that, we're going to get pulled off the air because it's just going to be too over people's heads way too much. But here we are 11 years later, and we still get to talk about these kind of things. But we also, 11 years later, still don't really know what it is that we're encountering when we're encountering the paranormal.
Well, I guess hence the subtitle of our book, Everything You Know Is Wrong.
I love it.
That's a bit presumptuous, but we're applying that to pretty much everything. History, theology, even what we know about ourselves and our world and our universe. We really don't know anything for sure. There are lots of interesting theories and there are lots of laws, as Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Martin will point out, or have pointed out in their book, Science Was Wrong. Very often you have laws and axioms that later turn out to be false themselves, not intentionally foisted on anybody, but they just, you get better information. So I think it's the first day of school as far as just about everything, particularly the paranormal.
What I love about it, though, is that it's one of the only things that you can research and hit a brick wall or realize that you were wrong. And there's just as much excitement as there can be frustration, because usually when you find out that everything that you know is wrong, you're going in a different direction, and that leads you to a whole new avenue of research and experience. So it's okay. It's part of the process. It's part of growing to realize, oh man, I've been following the wrong path all this time.
Well, yes, I think that's true, but I think there's also a lack of something on a deeper level, and that's that science is not perfect and it's very limited. The paradigm will not, in my opinion, explain the paranormal, because I think what we're dealing with is outside of mainstream science. However, you've got disciplined thinking and peer review. Also, you have a lot of politics, but you have that in the paranormal world too. But one of the problems with paranormal research, or pop paranormal research, as we call it, is that it strikes me that a lot of people, they don't talk to each other. They go to these conferences, and there is no, as far as I'm aware anyway, no serious peer review and no serious, sometimes not even disciplined thinking. In the sense, how, you're just going to sort of scream and run out of the house at worst. And at best, you're using engineers' tools and gadgets that we never had back in the 70s. And not to be curmudgeonly here, but I mean, people don't really, I think, understand necessarily how they work. We live in a society that's drunk with technology, so therefore we put faith in it. And there are a number of assumptions that have still not been traveled past by many investigators. And again, I think it's necessary to start from square one. So that's what we try and do. Maybe we're wrong. First thing we always say. But when we speak with audiences, we very rarely see the eyes roll, except from some of the dyed-in-the-wool old-time 19th century spiritualists who still will very often come up and say, I never thought of it that way. Maybe you've got a point. So we very rarely have any static, much to our own surprise, because it's new, and people who are not in the field, quote unquote, will sometimes say, well, this has happened to me all my life, and now I understand it, so I don't have to be afraid of it anymore, and all this sort of thing. So I hope that, hey, we're right, because if we're wrong, we're misleading a lot of people. But I think that we're right in at least attempting to push the envelope of understanding beyond the two-dimensional matter-spirit world dichotomy from the 19th century and way before that.
And it's funny because you mentioned these conventions as being things that people gather at, and it becomes kind of a social event more than it is, any kind of academic pursuit. And it's funny because if you have a convention of dentists, if the American Dental Association has its annual convention in Boston, then you're not going to have a bunch of dental fans showing up wanting to meet their favorite dentists and get autographs, and dentists are just sitting there talking about doing workshops, talking about different things, and a lot of that kind of learning aspect doesn't exist in these. It's more kind of like a Comic-Con type of thing, like a pop culture event of come and meet these people. And so,
well, that's not bad, a bad thing, but it probably doesn't lend itself to deeper pursuits, or again, disciplined thinking.
We're not getting the chance to really pick each other's brains as much as we would want to, and I think that tends to happen more in the field than anything. Is when you invite another investigator to come with you, that's when you're going to learn something new or push each other's boundaries a little bit, is when you're actually, quote unquote, on the job. Oh,
I agree. Absolutely. But I don't know about you, but we work with really one or two others, because sometimes they were in other parts of the country and they're not accessible on any regular basis. I'm thinking of Susan Shepard in West Virginia, whom you may know. She is probably one of the few psychic mediums I would work with, because she has a broader understanding of what's actually happening, I think. And Shane Searway from New Hampshire, who is speaking at some of the same events we are this year, is a Blackfoot shaman and also a very feet on the ground, disciplined investigator. That's a very good combination, and pretty rare in our experience. So, but it's funny, we're invited to speak more at UFO conventions than we are at strictly paranormal ones, because I don't know, it's a different kind of community, although there's a lot of crossover interest on many of the people who come to the UFO events, but at the strictly paranormal ones, and there are exceptions to the ones who don't like us, but we're not good for business, because we kind of question everything that has been assumed. I think that's one of the reasons we're not really invited to a lot of the big ones. But that's their prerogative, and we do what we can do.
Well, it's funny because you've been involved in this since the 70s. You're one of the founding voices of the paranormal, of this wave of the paranormal. And what's funny is in the days, I don't want to date you either, but in those days, in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, you didn't really have a lot of UFO investigators that were willing to have cross-pollination with ghost talk, and now it seems like those borders, those barriers are starting to fall.
And I think that is probably the most positive thing that's going on in pop paranormal research today, is people are talking to each other in that sense. Back in the day, I mean, there was very little contact, if any, between what few paranormal investigators there were and anybody involved in other areas of the paranormal. The cryptozoology was in one corner, ghost thing was another, and because UFO was in a third, and never the twain would meet. However, at least with me, and then later with Ben, many years later, it occurred to me, maybe we should look outside this particular house that's having issues. So we went into the yard, and then I wondered, well, you've got some strange things going on there. Let's see if we can talk to the neighbors. And sure enough, it ended up that when you could talk to the neighbors, very often they were having problems too that had the same flavor as what was going on in this main house. And you could keep pushing the envelope. And one day this was as late as 1995, someone in the case said, they were a neighbor, and they said, we saw a UFO land over in that field, which is right next to the house that was haunted. And so I began to realize, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Maybe the labels we put on many of these phenomena have to do with the contexts in which we experience them. For example, if you're sitting in your living room and a wispy figure goes through, and you're jumping up on the couch, aha, a ghost. However, if you're outside in the yard and that happens, and there's also a ball of light maybe up above, aha, an alien or at least a UFO. And there might be both, it might be neither, and we have, again, assumptions that are made from our very limited paradigm epistemological paradigm, and it's just they just aren't good enough. And when I started to investigate these cases back in the 70s, I was applying because I was in the seminary, so I had this theological background on top of the other assumptions, and they just weren't good enough. The people in the first case I investigated in the Pomfret, Connecticut, 70 to 72. They didn't seem to be dead at all, never mind in some kind of, well, I was assuming they were like souls in purgatory, this stuff. So that's where I started. And day one, the old ideas started to follow right away. So that's a long point to a short statement of yours, Tim, that, they are talking to each other now. And I wish it had happened many years ago, but it is happening now and to a point. And I think it's good. One issue, too, is that very often, and the Warrens were an exception. There was them, there was Hans Holzer, and one or two others at the time, but they didn't have like the pop groups running out, the hobbyist groups on weekends sitting in cemeteries. That was very rare. But when you told people you did this, they kind of looked at you, especially the seminary authorities. Mm-hmm. So I learned to kind of keep quiet about it. But you didn't have paranormal investigators such as they were even at times talking to psychics and mediums. And that perhaps was the first melting of the ice, and then finally people in other areas. And not now there are, we call it pan-paranormal sorts of gatherings and certainly approaches to the experience that are more open-minded than before. So I think it's a good start.
Well, in those days, in the time when there was a little bit more to being a paranormal investigator than it is now. Now it seems like anybody with a camera phone and a black T-shirt with a logo on it is a ghost hunter. But yeah. in those days, was there a lot of social interaction amongst different investigators, and did investigators hold each other accountable for what others were doing? Because that's what I think the biggest side that we're seeing of this explosion of people who want to be involved in this is there's not a lot of holding each other accountable. And when people do try to hold each other accountable, it's called bullying and all kinds
Politics
of different dynamics. But was that something was there a lot of peer review that happened in the 70s and 80s?
Well, I can only speak to my particular circle, which was quite varied, really. You had Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were artists by trade and sort of stumbled into this. And I only worked with them till 78, and then I kind of began to question what they were doing, and you didn't do that, so that was the end of that. You also had Father John Nicola, who was a Jesuit priest, technical advisor for the film The Exorcist. I met him through my brother, who was a priest in Washington, right across the street from where Father Nicola was. So he had the very anonymous job of being the assistant director of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, that humongous church that's there. The Pope always goes there when he visits Washington, all that sort of thing. But of course, that was just a cover for his real job, which was being sort of the chief expert in exorcism in the American Church. So there was Dr. Louisa Rhine from Duke University, who was obviously a PhD and a psychologist, and they're doing a lot of work at the time in ESP research on children, that sort of thing. And then there was Dr. Brian Riley, a parapsychologist who was at the University of Connecticut, not teaching that, but but he was a psychologist. So there were a lot of people. There were a lot of brain power, a lot of people with PhDs. Around at least me, and then there was me, this young seminary student who was hoping to, because the Warrens were hoping to have another priest in their quiver of, for ammunition when they were trying to get publicity for exorcisms and stuff. And also Father Lawrence Cotter of the Diocese of Ogdensburg, who didn't teach, but lived at the seminary I was studying at the time. And he was the diocesan exorcist, and they actually let me work with him. So a lot of clergy and a couple of PhDs, and Ed and Lorraine Warren. That's a cast of an unusual film right there. So, but there was really Hans Holzer was a sort of a popular guy, wrote a zillion books, this sort of thing. And there were a couple of others. I know Richard Sennett started early, and Lloyd Orbach, people of that kind. But I didn't know them until recently. So it was just a lot. It was very different than it is today. We didn't have the electronics. All we had was very seat of the pants stuff, a cassette tape recorder, and cameras that actually had film in them. Nothing spectacular, but the whole EVP thing really hadn't It had in a way kind of started, but it didn't get the attention it does today, and this sort of thing. So it was, as I say, very seat of the pants, but there was a lot of very knowledgeable people in their fields, and they tried to apply it to this field, and but it still didn't quite congeal,
right,
in our opinion.
I remember Keith Johnson telling me back in those days, investigating Andrea Perron's house back in the early days and using reel-to-reel recorders to try to capture EVPs.
Oh, yeah. Keith goes back just as far as I do, if not a little farther. But he was involved in the Perron case, and he was actually has told me about that too. So it's really, and so was Andrea. So that was quite the thing. But we had things like the Bridgeport poltergeist outbreak as I call it, of '74, and we were in there. We were waiting for the diocese of the Catholic Diocese of Bridgeport to allow an exorcism, and there was a priest, and Ed Lorraine Warren and myself, and it was just a zoo. Because Warren, he always let the media in, and right. It's ironic. I'm in the newspaper business as you are, partially there, Tim. And that's the last thing I would do is call any reporters into anything like this.
I mean, I know a lot of people.
Circus resulted.
A lot of people have come down on the Warrens for that, and said that they were kind of doing this for the publicity. But kind of in a way, if you look at it, though, it's no different than a lot of ghost hunters, paranormal researchers now will do the same thing. If they're going to conduct an investigation of some famous historic haunt, they'll let the media know, whether they do ahead of time or whether they let them know their results or whatever. But in those days, really, the only way that they were getting referrals and getting interest from people is by these stories being covered. So in a way, it was kind of a good way to reach out there and find more clients, is by having this coverage. But at the same time, then that creates that vicious cycle of, well, then how much of what went on you're actually doing just for, just to give the reporter something for the story.
Well, as one who was there, I just took a dim view on it. Perhaps it's summed up, Tim, by a conversation that occurred in a house in, I believe it was Attleboro, one of Ben's early cases, with me. And there was a group who invited us in, and they were talking about these great EVPs they'd gotten, and the poor owner of the house was sitting there suffering with all kinds of things that in our opinion, were feeding the parasites that were responsible for the case, pretty much, and nobody was doing anything for her. So I took her aside, and we began to talk, and then Ben kind of took the case from there. But it's the people, and Shane Searway puts it well. He says places aren't haunted, people are. I don't know if I go that far, but sure. I see what he's trying to get to. The people, we don't just sit around like lumps, and I'm sure you know this. We don't just sit around and be affected by our environment. Everything is connected. We don't believe in the island theory that everything we are is contained within our bodies and brains and all this stuff. So that's something you really have to believe, I think, if you're going to believe in the ghost in the sense of the classic spiritualist interpretation, that we are not connected, but we are actually. The one of the messages of the study of quantum consciousness is that there really is no such thing as an individual in the old sense of the word, with all due respect to the founders of our country. We've got a unity that is out there that connects everything, and hence in a paranormal case, the people participate in what they're experiencing, and you deal with the people, and then you don't just go in and fix it. I mean, you deal with the people and what's going on, and because they never tell you everything, you have to spend. We spend years on cases sometimes, and people have said, "Well, you've only investigated 1,000 cases in 47 years." I said, "Well, because we spend." There's one case we've spent over 10 years on. Wow. And now that we're into the paranormal, as we call them, flap areas, these huge 230 square mile areas where all kinds of things are happening, and where you need a team of spies essentially to keep an eye on it, and where the government or something that looks like the government or the military is inevitably involved. It's a deep well, Tim. And it takes a long time to do it, and you have to work with the people. That's how we believe that we get results, and that was not happening in the Bridgeport house in 1974, because that concept wasn't there. They were demons. They were attacking this family. which was very religious, by the way, which I found interesting. And you did the ceremonies of exorcism to express, authority over these demons and then throw them out. I mean, I was involved in 10 exorcisms of people, and sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't work. And I just didn't think they were doing the right thing, like they're going to listen to me. But I mean, everything was just not good enough for me at the time. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, I mean,
maybe 5 cents.
It does have the when you're going through this, you're looking at it from your own sensibility, from your own experience, from your own what you're encountering on the investigation. But a good investigator also has to take into account what the person who's being subjected to this is feeling and what they're going through, and take their belief system into account as well. Because
precisely.
I'm not a religious person. I don't have any background in any particular religion. I believe what I believe, but I don't know.
I believe what I believe too now. Yeah.
I don't know all the different varying levels of theology. I don't know all the different levels of demonology and all that kind of stuff. But if I go to some place and somebody's telling me, I'm having this experience, and it happens, when I read the Bible, and if I say the Psalm, this happens. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything to me, but it means something to you, and it means something to your experience. So I have to be able to be willing to accept that and put myself in that position, because paranormal experiences just can't be through your own lens. It has to be through a collective lens of everybody, and you have to be willing to accept what other people are going through as well as what you're seeing with your own eyes.
Oh, sure. No, I agree. Well, one thing that is interesting today on another level is relatively recent discoveries, I suppose, or people becoming aware of them, is that there are other factors that can influence what people are experiencing. For example, I believe it was 1998, you've heard of the infrasonics thing. Some poor sap was working late in a British laboratory, and was by himself, and all of a sudden the beakers on the lab table were starting to clink together, and the papers were going up and down, and he looked toward the doorway, and there was a shadowy figure standing there. And so he, as Ed Warren used to say, he considered retreat the better part of valor, and off he went. But it turned out that, according to the findings, that there was a faulty relay or something in the ventilation system that was setting up a standing wave in the building, a sound wave, and that can cause the there are questions. It causes the impression of paranormal phenomena going on, and it does affect material things so that they can clink and all this sort of business. It can shake beds, and you can't hear it with the naked ear. And the question is, do the phenomena that go beyond those small physical effects, is the impression of these created in the mind by the sound wave, or does the sound wave open doors to parallel realities that we may not be aware of, and therefore be what we would consider legitimately quote unquote paranormal in this case? So there's still questions. And the second thing is, it's been found that certain molds, particularly black mold, that are common in houses, can be hallucinogenic if you inhale the spores. We've run into this several times, especially in several cases in New Hampshire lately, where the people were simply inhaling this. I mean, and of course, but the trouble is the findings on this and the data are still hard to pin down. But I think it's a factor that had to be considered. And we in one house, the mold was cleared away by a contractor, and all phenomena ceased immediately. So I mean, these are some new findings that I think also have to be considered. And all it does is complicate our task as investigators. Another thing, Tim, that you may have heard from Keith Johnson is that in the old days you could go in and the guy would say, well, this welt or bruise on the child was inflicted by the poltergeist. Mm-hmm. Well, in those days they were simpler, and you could accept that if you had the right data. But now you have to call child welfare or else you're in trouble.
Right, because there's mandatory reporting and.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the lawsuits to begin, frankly, with some of these people who are out there, setting themselves up as experts and not knowing what they're doing. And I really cringe when they put themselves up as counselors for these people. I mean, that in itself might be a litigious situation at some point. So there are a lot of new things going on. They're not necessarily good.
Well, and part of it, too, is, now with this big, back then, if you had a small handful of people in the area that you could contact for something like this, it was pretty easy to to do references. Because say somebody wanted to have you come into their house, they'd say, well, can you give us a name of 3 other people whose houses you investigated so we can call them and make sure everything's cool? And then you can give them that information and they talk.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's so many people and you don't know who to trust anymore that we see these stories that happen all the time of, sex offenders getting involved with paranormal teams and the team didn't know, or paranormal teams come in and investigate the house and the next thing you know, a flat screen TV is missing. All these kind of situations that can happen because as it's exploded with popularity, it's become harder and harder to regulate.
Well, I see that some groups, just from their websites, and some of these groups, I wonder if they're anything more than websites. I don't know. But they do seem to take a tone of care when anyone makes an attempt to get involved. And very often they're old friends who know each other in the first place. So I guess it's a case-by-case basis. But beyond that, we discourage people. Well, I'll give you an example of what our attitude is, Tim. I was invited, this has got to be 06 or 07 down to Clearwater, Florida, to that that giant hotel that's wooden. I think it's the largest occupied wooden building in the country at this point, in Clearwater, and there was a conference for beginning ghost hunters, and I went against my better judgment, and they asked me, well, Mr. Eno, if you had one word of advice for the group, what would it be? And I said, don't. And 230 people stared at me, and I said, you have no idea what you're doing, what you're touching, what you could connect with, what would be involved in dealing with the people who are having this. I said, read books, of course, also written by people who don't know what they're doing sometimes, very often. Watch the darn TV shows if you have to, but take up soccer or something else. Collect, because it's, for a lot of people, it is reckless and dangerous to be out there doing this.
And not only that, but you have to know, this is coming from my own experience, and I didn't necessarily heed my own advice, but you need to have a firm belief in what you believe. You need to have a firm foundation in what you believe. You have to have a firm foundation in how you see yourself and what you want out of life, because it's so easy to fall susceptible, not only to, we can say, okay, there's dark things that can come and attach itself to you. There's dark experiences and bad things that can happen to people. But just to have your whole entire worldview change in an instant like that, you have to be ready and be prepared for that. The first time something reaches out and grabs you and shakes you and you realize, holy crap, this stuff really is real, you have to be ready to accept that and process
That's right. Absolutely. Well, some of the most upset people I've ever seen, and maybe you've had this happen, are when, you're giving a talk, and someone comes up at the end and says, they're a doctor, or even I had a physicist come up one time, or a nurse, or some kind of serious professional person, very often with a PhD or an MD or something like this, and they'll say, I never believed in any of this until it happened to me, and that it turned my world upside down. I have never been able to sleep since, or things like that. There are people who, particularly when they have advanced degrees, are very comfortable in a belief system that it helps people and is fine, but it's not enough when something from outside that system invades and inserts itself into your life, because you're not prepared. Most of us are very comfortable, and this stuff can make you very uncomfortable very quickly. So that's another consideration, is that you're absolutely right, Tim. You've got to be anchored, not necessarily in the same things other people are, but in something that gives you strength. And when we would go in to an exorcism, you use the holy water and the stuff, if the person is a Christian, or you use something else. But I mean, that's taking the power, I think, of the person and channeling it, for lack of a better term, into the person's own self-defense. I've seen it work with teddy bears, with young children. Whatever is that anchor for you, it's a symbol of it, that can work. It doesn't necessarily have to be Christian or Buddhist or whatever. It's what your belief system is. And I'm not really a relativist morally, but I think certainly you have to be when it comes to the medicine that is applied. Just as a doctor would prescribe certain medicines for one person and certain medicines for someone else. It's the same idea.
Well, we're going to take a break. We have to go for the network news. That'll be coming up in just a moment. And when we come back on the other side, we'll talk more with our guest, Paul Eno. You can check out his website during the break if you'd like to, newenglandghosts.com. You can find out more about Paul, about Ben, about their books, and you can find out more about their radio show as well, Behind the Paranormal. So check all that out during the break. When we come back on the other side, we'll have more of the discussion with our guest, Paul Eno. We'll take your calls as well at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. You can also share your questions in the chat room at SpookySouthCoast.com and on the free Spooky South Coast app for Android and for Apple devices. And, of course, you can always email them to us as well, spookycrew@SpookySouthCoast.com. Send them to us on Twitter using the hashtag SpookyLive. So many ways to get involved in the discussion, but as always, we love to hear your voice. So, again, 508-996-0500. We'll be back with more Spooky South Coast in just a moment.
New Bedford's news,